I'm Miski Noor. I'm the co-founder and co-executive director of Black Visions, a Black queer and trans-led organization building power within Black communities to dismantle systems of violence.
And I'm Solana Rice. I'm the co-founder and co-executive director of Liberation in a Generation, a national movement support organization building the power of people of color to totally transform our economy. Who controls it, how it works, and more importantly, for whom?
We're excited to guest edit this edition of The Forge, an online journal on organizing strategy and practice, along with my co-director at Black Visions, Candace Montgomery. We'll be looking back at the uprisings last summer and the longer movement to defund and abolish the police and prison industrial complex.
We're here today with Ash Lee Henderson and Greisa Martinez. In case you don't know, Ash Lee is the first Black woman to serve as the co-executive director of the Highlander Research and Education Center, and a leader within the movement for Black Lives. Greisa is the executive director of United We Dream, the largest immigrant youth-led community in the country. They are both members of the Rising Majority, a coalition committed to building a powerful, anti-racist left for radical democracy.
We had a rousing conversation with Greisa and Ash about what it means to support and center Black leadership, the spiritual elements of our work, and their visions for the future. Tune in. Yeah, I think the conversation that we don't have enough, and maybe it's because of trauma, maybe it's because we move through these cycles so quickly, is that the left in general has this way of just like eating its own, right? And just the weight of leadership and what it means. And we often even romanticize Black leaders. And over the last year, especially, I've been pondering what were their lived experiences, right? How were these folks that we uplift now treated when they were alive, especially by their comrades and their peers, and how do we want to move in ways that actually honors all of our lives? Because I'm if the left eats its own leadership, especially, what does that mean for marginalized leadership, and how great that weight, you know what I mean, is.
It's a setup, run. We don't. I was talking about this right after Ferguson exploded. Same thing about Sanford too, but Ferguson in particular, because it just had a particular national eye that Sanford didn't get, which I think is nothing but fuckery around not giving a shit about what happens to Black people in the South. But I digress. And I was just we push people that were dope ass grassroots organizers and activists that learned in the midst of the trial, right, how to be excellent at shutting shit down. But didn't have any fucking clue about the burdens that come with being national leaders and didn't particularly ask for it. But it was this CNN interview has to happen. So send this person. Or the press wants to talk to that, send this directly impacted person. All this tokenization based on identity. We weaponized identity. It was an overcorrection. And then when people didn't know what they were doing or messed up as those directly impacted leaders, then we were fuck them, they crazy. Or that's not us, we didn't do that. We're the people that knew how to do it, right? Or whatever, right? We do that, it's a setup. You're right, Miski, it's a setup. I think this is a cross sector, but particularly on the left, that when we don't feel powerful enough to win against the actual opposition, the easy fight to have is the one where I disagree with you, right? That's the easy thing to do. It's not even because I necessarily want to eat you, right? It's because that's the thing I can control.
Right.
Yeah, the control, you have power.
We'll argue with people we don't know, because that might help us. We don't argue with other people.
For real, I'm you got the whole state. Municipal, statewide, you got Congress, you got different branches of the state you can fight. You got sheriffs and cops. You got CCA, right? You got Core Civic. You got you got G4S. You got international players.
God, choices.
There's whole ass billionaires with addresses. But the person you want to be mad at is some visible movement leader, or vice versa, some grassroots chapter.
Yeah.
It's money, ego, and credit, man. That shit'll kill us. And for what? We so close to winning. That's why I tell people all the time, we're so close to winning. I can taste it. And I'm not convinced that the reason we won't win is because of the state or white supremacists or capitalism or whatever. It's because I think we're gonna trip over our own fucking shoelaces at the finish line. Yeah. We gonna get distracted looking at each other trying to see who's gonna get there first. And just all of us just collapsing. And then the state and like the white led nonprofits are just gonna like go through the same, you know what I mean?
Tasting the win is hard. It's hard.
I get it.
It's scary, and it's scary.
It's scary, but it's like we right there. We already winning. That's the thing, right?
We already won.
We already won. But people would rather be mad about spoils from the minutia of smaller wins.
Yeah.
Than being like, listen, man, you play your role. Whoever gets us there first, we'll see each other at the finish line.
Do you think that's about trust too? Like I don't trust that you'll get across the finish line and remember me.
Yeah, I do. I think that's part of it, but I think the problem with it is the only way you can build, like the reason I trust G is because we've been, and Miss E is like, because we've been in it. Like we've been through the fire, like literally in my case, very literally, right? Like white supremacists burned my shit down. And like, these were the people that were there. And like, you know, I try to be the person that's also there when they doing stupid shit to my people, right? So it's like, we built trust not through like intellectually stimulating conversations where we got into alignment about our values and tactical and strategic interventions. We learned to trust each other because we showed the fuck up in the work, in the doing of the work. And even as messy and complicated as it's been, especially some of the work the three of us have done together, it's like, we trust each other because we've seen that we keep showing up, doing what my grandmama would say, trust is doing what you said you're gonna do over and over and over again. And when you mess it up, clean it up, right? It's not just like, I'm in leadership and I cut you a check so you trust me. Or I am doing a thing that I feel really passionate about and you say you're gonna be in alignment with the values that I created, and that's how we build trust. We have enough evidence now to prove that doesn't work, right? It doesn't work like that. Like you actually have to have some shared project that you're doing some work through. And we don't have enough people in those sort of shared spaces. And I think that's not even necessarily all the fault of our movement. That's also the fault of like intersecting crises that are happening at the same time we're trying to save the world, right? It's like grace and abundance. Grace and abundance. But like also some like really like come hither, like come here. Sit down right here. Quit acting an ass.
You okay?
Yeah. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, I feel real grandmama-ish. Like there's some people on social media, I want to be like, you come sit right here. Come sit right here and don't touch that phone until you've taken a nap and eaten a Snickers bar, because you're out here acting a fool. You acting a fool, and it don't do no good to nobody's movement. You just did it so you would feel better. And I bet in 5 minutes, you still gonna feel like shit.
What has changed for you the most in your work since the uprisings last May? How did you navigate the shifts in your work? Whether it's the spotlight, whether it's the influx of resources, whether it's just navigating the movement energy itself. How has that changed and shifted, and you alongside that?
Yeah, I mean, I think last year changed a lot of things. I think it changed how grassroots organizations in particular actually talk to their people, right? And this happened during a time where everybody wanted to talk to their people about everything, right? The intersecting crises required it, right? We needed to talk to our people to make sure that they were safe and had what they needed to survive, you know, a global pandemic like nothing that most of us had ever experienced before in a US context in particular, right? Which led to an increased economic crisis that's been worse than many of us have seen in a very long time, if ever, right? Because it also impacted a lot of privileged people that could have said that they didn't know no different before last year, right? We saw the intersection of the pandemic of white nationalism and white supremacy and the violent paramilitary forces that came together to take advantage of a moment that they had been building to for decades, if not years, right? And so I think people were trying to talk to their people to make sure that they had what they needed to survive all of those intersecting things, while we were also in other crises, like a housing crisis, a crisis of, people's ability to freely move, which I'm sure G will talk about, right? Like all of these things were intersecting all at once. And so, typically the way, especially in a Southern context, and I think also like a Black context, is like the way we would have done that was like go sit on somebody's porch or go sit in their living room and talk to them. We couldn't do that this time, right? I think what's also real about the moment that 2020 brought was that, I don't think it's unfamiliar even in years before that, is that like crises happen. And then all of a sudden there's this inundation of people that want to talk to you about it, whether it's the press or it's other social movements that are trying to learn from you here and abroad, or it's philanthropists that are trying to figure out how they missed a moment to get you prepared for this, or to alleviate the need for a charity relationship and moving into solidarity by just giving the resources in a multi-generational, general operating kind of way. General operating being like, we can use money for whatever we need to use money for. That would have prevented the need for having a conversation with them in the middle of our trauma, in the middle of the hurt, in the middle of the urgency, the need for a rapid response, or to give us enough not only to rapidly respond, but to move into recovery and to prepare for the next onslaught of series of man-made crises, right? So I think all of that impacted my year last year in particular, because Highlander's like a place-based organization, right? We own 186 acres in Newmarket, Tennessee, in the country. And our way of being in community with our people, like we didn't even have like access to reliable internet until like maybe 2-3 years ago. So moving into a virtual way of being able to communicate with our people, having those sorts of communications and narrative strategies, being able to use technology to reach our people was something that was particularly new to us. I think that we were in an awkward way, the universe trying us and preparing us for the next wave of crisis. After the white supremacists attempted to stop our work by burning down our administrative offices in March of 2019, we took very seriously getting like the technology that we needed, and quite frankly, building the community safety sort of networks that we needed to not only be able to communicate regardless of our rural geographic relationship to our people, but also to make sure that we were secure when we did use the technology that we were starting to come into access to. So we were ready for digital. Ironically, this country bumpkin was ready to do Zoom calls in early 2020 because we became our own internet service provider. So we were able to help support the capacity of other organizations that were trying to figure out how do you facilitate space, which is something that Highlander is good at doing, right? Bringing people together in strategic dialogue. How do you do that in a virtual world? We got to practice that and then share those lessons. So I think that shifted, but I think the biggest stuff to me wasn't the technocratic stuff. That's all true. The biggest thing for me was like, I think the left shifted into thinking about what it really does mean to build the biggest we possible. That's something that me and G really talked about a lot as we were developing the front line, is like, we need a united front, right? We need not just a popular one that's actively working across difference, but we need an actual organized united front that is tactically making interventions that doesn't, it's like a group of people that don't always work together if we actually going to build the kind of world that we deserve, particularly around the world that we would deserve, but also to stop the world that was actually on its way with a second term, with an administration that had been very, very clearly not about our people's needs. And quite frankly, like what would happen if the Congress didn't go our way. So I think we saw people lean into the desire of not working alone, being in this together because we don't have to do it alone. And I think that we saw that when we do that, we actually can really, really, if we build this multi-sector POC-led united front, then not only could we win some things and defeat some things, but it also gives us more opportunity to build multi-tactical strategies instead of just throwing tactical spaghetti at the wall and hoping something sticks, right? We actually got to be proactive for a change, even if it was sparked by some reactionary tendencies. I think it gave us the ability to not only respond to the immediate, but to plan to the future. And I think that's how we ended up in the conditions in 2021 that we actually planned to be in.
Plus. Everything that Ash just said. I think from my perspective and point of view, 3 things changed The first thing is, United We Dream has functioned within the immigrant justice ecosystem, and that comes with a lot of beauty and joy and power, and it also comes with a lot of anti-Blackness sentiment that has like lived within it, and it also comes with a lot of like strategic miscalculations that like separated criminal justice reform from an immigrant rights perspective. And the outcome of the uprisings was like, it was undeniable how these things were like interconnected and interlinked. Like when you saw the rise of like Trump's boots on the ground here in Washington, D.C., and you also saw him sort of like activate like border patrol in places like Portland, in places all across the country, to be able to disappear like U.S. citizens from its core. Like it was undeniable that like these forces were made, and these were made to control and like to disrupt Black and brown power, like wherever it existed. And I think that it was a big shift for the immigrant justice movement to be able to see those like live and in like color, and also to see ourselves as, at least I speak for United We Dream, the shift wasn't that we saw ourselves as like we're gonna move in solidarity, and because we believe that like it's like the cool thing or right thing, moral right thing to do, but rather like our lives are on the line, and if Black lives don't matter, if Black people can't breathe, then we can't, like it is our lives on the line too. So I think that was a shift for us organizationally. It was like we've been working towards that for the last, I would say, 5 years of our work, and like since the inception of United We Dream. But through the uprisings, I think that like it's like water and oxygen to United We Dream now. Like that's like the frame in which we occupy. I'll say that the second piece is the thing that shifted was a lot of like our opposition also responded to the power that the uprisings had in an equal and even more forceful piece. And this is where we saw like even more deaths of Black folks that didn't get to make the news. In some ways, we saw deaths of like the forced sterilization of like immigrant women in detention centers. It was like sort of like no longer wanting to be or like worried about like what the public messaging or the PR optics of it was. It was like a full force confrontation of us as a reflection of our power. And I think that in some ways helped unleash things that have always been true to us, like as have always like that stare that like you grew up with. I remember one of the moments where I felt like the most powerless was I was with my mom and my dad used to carry these like wood pallets. He would like go and get them from like the stores, and they were broken, and he would go bring them home and fix them and sell it back to those stores. And I thought that was like the ultimate immigrant hustle. And one of those times there was like this white man that came, and he like, it was like me and my 3 younger sisters. We were like 10, like really young, elementary school. And like he just came, and like he like ran, and he yelled at my dad, and he yelled at my mom, and saying like, shame on you, like I can't believe that you're here, like you're bringing your kids to do this. Called us wetbacks, all of the like terms that you could have. And that way that he looked at us, like this, like where you feel insignificant, where you feel like you shouldn't even, like, you know that they're wrong, but you shouldn't even say anything back. That way that man looked at us, it just became amplified across the country. And like, it was undeniable, I think, the way that people experienced that. And I think that they were in some ways like allowed to be themselves in broad daylight. And I think that's where you see the impact of January 6th and like the way that they decided to take on Congress. But it wasn't just all of the members of Congress. I think it's important for us to pinpoint that people like Ayanna Pressley, like people like Rashida Tlaib, like all of those women of color that have been like at the forefront of like creating a new America were the targets of those people. It wasn't like the Marjorie Taylor Greene or whatever that were on their like target list. It was those people that have been the embodiment of the movement, in some ways movement vision within the House of Congress, that were part of the thing that they were responding to. And then the third thing that I'll say that shifted is something else that was brought to the center that has always been with us, which is the role of joy as a shield to like mass political violence. Like when we saw someone like Nalini Stamp within the frontline movement, like jump on to have like joy to the polls at all of these polling locations with people dancing outside, like celebrating, and everybody, you know, like we had been prepping for like months to like have like this like big, you know, big response from the opposition on election night, and it kind of almost eerily felt really quiet and like without inaction. It wasn't because they decided to change their game. It wasn't because they thought like, nah, let's leave them alone. It was because we had, as Ash was saying, an offensive strategy that centered joy, that centered community, that centered families, that was undeniable as well. And so I think that like there's been a lot of like learning around how that's being embodied in different places. And you saw that you saw joy front and center in Georgia, where like everybody had left Georgia out to like dry. Like people were like, oh, you know, I got calls from people saying like, oh, well, you're not gonna win anything anymore because like we're not gonna get Georgia. So like, what's your plan B here? And like, I refuse to give up on like the women that have been organizing there for decades. Like we refuse to do that. And I do think that that was a big lesson. And the thing that shifted is like the undeniable power of Black women organizing, I think, and like the consistency and like how much work and like uncelebrated work like has gone through to get to that point, that then, you know, has then shifted like the way that our democracy is even able to function now. And so it was a Black women-led multiracial movement that delivered the shifts that needed to happen, not only in the moment of the uprising, but also in the elections, but also in the response to January 6th, and also will be the same movement that will keep Joe Biden accountable and Kamala Harris accountable, because we got work to do. We got joy. We got a real opposition that is like ready to like take us out. But we have each other, and like there are more and more people that are joining us because our movement is magnetic, like our cause is electric, and like why wouldn't they join us? So, you know, I'm out of many things, my life changed, and like it got me closer to share more space with Ash and Miski and you, Solana. So I'm like, life got better.
Yes, thank you for all of that, G and Ash. It's almost like you knew what my next question was. I'm like, I don't even really need a transition, but, you know, just want to like pull on some of these threads that both of y'all brought in, like Ash around spirit, G around the ways UWD's been trying to shift, and what it means to have these gains come from like Black-led, Black queer, women-led power. And so I want to dig into more with both of you around what does it mean to actually center Black leadership in multiracial ethnic spaces? How does that impact your work? And why is multiracial, multi-ethnic organizing essential if we're going to get to freedom land or liberation land, or a world in which all of our humanity is honored and fully held? And G, I'd love to come back to you first this time.
Wow, that's a big one. You know, I grew up as like a daughter of I shared this with Solana, like I'm the daughter of a Southern Baptist preacher who found the convention as like a home because he just needed to like belong to something when we first came to the US, and it was the only one in Dallas that was sort of active. And the reason why that's such a central part of who I am, even now, is like, you know, I'm no longer a Baptist, and I feel like the lesson that he taught me about faith Faith is evidence of things unseen. And I think that for me, my faith practice is organizing. It's like creating conditions for where young people can be transformed, just like I was, where I was like deeply ashamed of being undocumented. I was so deep in the closet that I didn't even know that I was like queer. Like I didn't even ask myself those questions. And like the power of like social movements, the power of power to be able to hold space for transformation is such an important like faith practice and like spiritual practice for me. Like in the same way that like you can come in as a sinner and be like repent and then be able to have space in this space. I mean, that's not the best analogy, but I just think that movement spaces need to continue to hold the holy space of transformation, that not everybody is born woke, that not everybody knows what all the letters mean, that people have a lot of internalized like white supremacy and anti-Blackness and homophobia and all those things, but that does not make them like things that should be like disposed of or not worthy of our movement or not worthy of our cause, but rather that makes them exactly the right people that we want to have in our space so that we can move and walk together to a different direction and then be able to like have their gifts help us give more power and more shine as we move forward. And so I think one of the things that has grounded me in this moment, and I hope I'm getting to the core of your question, is, you know, the ability for our movements to be able to hold on to the practice and the discipline of hope and the discipline of joy and transformation. And so I think that the Southern Baptist in me sometimes like wants to get like super like, you know, you didn't say my right like terminology and like you did not you didn't really like you know, contributing to the conversation in the way that I would have contributed or said the same thing. But I just feel like the challenge for me as we move forward is ensuring that we continue to create holy spaces of transformation, and that having be a key part of our strategy. So I think politics is important, policy is important, but the people are the things that are irreplaceable, and that like we need to make sure that we're creating infrastructure to support them.
Yeah, I mean that's a whole word to answer this question. I think that's it. You know, the little that I would add to it's funny because, you know, I'm also a preacher's kid. I'm a PK. I'm the Black side of the Baptist tradition. We're Southern, but we're not Southern Baptists. We're missionary Baptists, and it informs everything. I have the practice of Black faith work it informs everything about how I know to build movements. But even if that wasn't true, I think it's no question that this is spiritual work, as we were talking about during the Kiki, right? Like when the white supremacists burned down my office, they weren't just trying to harm my physical person. If that was true, they would have potentially used other tactics or targeted a different building. Although it's true, I used to sleep in that building often. The thing that they were trying to do was break my spirit. Right? They wanted to scare me, my staff, the people that come to Highlander, all of those of us that were directly impacted by that attack. They wanted to freeze us up so we didn't continue to win, right? And create more and more conditions to win. So to me, it's like it would be naive to assume that this isn't spiritual warfare that we're in, right? But even if that side of the coin that sort of centers the opposition wasn't true, how many of us have been in an action where we're like, I believe that we will win, but we have no material evidence to prove that is true, right? The substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen, right? Just like you said. How many times have you said like, ain't no power like the power of the people because the power of the people don't stop? When when you can't, like the action will be over and people will go home, right? Like we shall overcome, right? Even before us, we've been naming this. And what blew my mind as I was thinking about it was like, oh yeah, like that I believe that we will win chant is just like what my grandmama and them used to sing when they would sing, victory is mine, victory is mine, victory today is mine. Right? Like, they didn't have any evidence that that would be true, but they were naming and claiming it. So there was something familiar in my spirit when we got into the streets by the hundreds of thousands and then last year in the millions saying like, no, like this is what will be, period. No other option, right? It's how I feel grounded in my demand. So I think a couple of things to this question of like, so what then to the multiracial tendencies of this sort of newer way of being together in a 21st century context beyond the silos of identity. And I say this as someone who strongly believes in identity politics. I believe it matters. I believe it matters to be, you know, an undocumented and unafraid, queer and unashamed woman leading United We Dream action, just as much as I believe it matters to be an inheritor of the great legacy of resistance of the Black liberation movement in a 21st century context. That matters, right? But I also believe that collective liberation isn't just a thing that I value, it's a thing that I practice. And if I'm not practicing it, then I'm not doing it, right? That solidarity is not just transactional, like you come to my protest, I come to your protest, that's solidarity. No, it's recognizing that literally I am going to be disproportionately impacted by systemic oppression here, there, and everywhere across these man-made borders, and that we actually need each other, even in our differences, our tactical expertise, if we're gonna have enough scale, enough power, enough brilliance to be able to beat back the attacks that are coming our way. Point blank, period. And even if that wasn't true, what I know for a fact, we'll use the arson as an example, they spray painted a symbol in the parking lot when they burned down my office. And that very same symbol was on the gun that the white supremacists used to shoot up folks in Christchurch, New Zealand, right? We know that Marsha Blackburn, an elected official out of Tennessee, has been meeting with Australian Nazis, right? We knew that Trump had a very tight buddy-buddy relationship with Netanyahu in Israel, right? On and on and on, right? Our opposition is absolutely building a global movement. Multi-sector, multi-issue, multi-class, right? How are we to win if we don't also build a multi-issue, multi-racial, multi-class, multi-sector global movement? It's just common sense. If you can't do it because it's right by your spirit, do it because it's right because you want to win, right? So I think the period on the sentence for me isn't even just rooted in my understanding of the methodology of cultural organizing that Highlander has continued to, you know, train people on and learn about and try to become experts in. That if you use art and culture and faith and spirit, you'll change policy and practice. That's actually how you create a new cultural status quo. But even if that wasn't true, what I know is that when my elders and ancestors said by any means necessary, they meant by all the means, right? That it is actually my inheritance that Black people and Latinx folks and Indigenous folks and Asian American folks and everybody that we could get our hands on, Arab descended folks, right? All of our people have always had a tradition of trying to be in right relationship with one another as we tried to navigate the fuckery of like colonization and white supremacy and capitalism and all the things. And if we don't do that, then we are conceding territory. We are conceding territory of people. Like, it's both. I agree with G. Like, it's about believing. I believe in people's transformation and salvation from the systems of harm that they inherited. But it's like the secondary thing to me is also that I believe that I can't win without them. That I can't be the best me. I can't have the best material conditions unless we're all in it together, right? There might be some lines of demarcation where our paths split up, and that's fine. But we can still do that and be in right relationship with each other, right? That actually is possible. I believe it to be true. And if I concede them, it creates a vacuum, and someone will fill it, right? So the period on the sentence to me is that we've got example after example after example of how we've conceded territory and it's bit us in the butt on the back end, right? Not even just with white people, which is whom people probably are assuming I'm talking about, right? That's true, right? We conceded white people because we didn't want to have conversations about whiteness. how it shows up in collective liberation movements across the left, right? Or progressive or liberal spaces too. Nobody wants to talk about white people. White people don't even want to talk about white people, right? And so we conceded them as a territory that deserved organizing. And guess who filled it? The white right, nationalists, paramilitary forces, right? But we do the same thing with other communities of color, right? Nationalism isn't just a problem when it comes to white people, right? Anti-Black racism isn't just a problem that disproportionately impacts Black people because white people are racist, as G so eloquently pointed out, right? And so to me, the big thing around why is multiracial, multi-ethnic organizing essential? It's because when we don't create those senses of belonging and meaningful work for people, our opposition, our enemies fill in the gap. And it makes our work that much harder because they are adapting to the 50-year strategies to pull those people away from us, right? When actually their home, their spiritual home, their movement home, their political home could be right here with us, where they belong, where we could be building beloved community. I don't think we win without that sort of multiracial. I think there's plenty that we can win in self-determining movement spaces that are rooted in identity. I don't want to say that like the only path to liberation is a multiracial strategy. I don't think that's true, but I do think we get even bigger wins when we can do both. And I believe that we are excellent enough to do both, and we deserve both.
I love all these themes that you all are bringing out. And in our last wrap-up question, I'm going to ask this in a sort of a two-parter. This edition is about the uprising that came as a result of the murder of George Floyd and several other people. There are a lot of visions about policing, about imprisonment. Some we can get with, some we can't. I'm curious about your visions, but also what's not being heard. So what's being said, but still remains unheard in all of these conversations about where we need to go?
Yeah, I think this is a great question. And every single person that did absolutely anything, whether it was protesting or calling your legislator or joining the movement for Black Lives or the Rising Majority or the Frontline or any one of the organizations that holds that infrastructure up, like every single one of those interventions that each of us in our communities and our organizations lifted is critical to the 2021 that we inherited. I just want to be clear about that. No one organization owns the uprising. It was all of us. That's what made it so powerful, and that's what changed the material conditions so drastically and dramatically, right? So I want to say that up front. We weren't the first, last, or only to do any of that, right? And I appreciate that it, like what you said, Selena, about like, it was, yeah, frustration about what happened, anger and righteous rage about what happened to George Floyd, but it was also like the separation of immigrant families even before that, right? And Breonna Taylor before him, and Tony McCabe, the Black trans man that was murdered in Florida, right? Like all the cumulative death, the cumulative impact is what led to this uprising, including our righteous rage about what happened to George. You know, I don't think people get asked about their utopian visions. I talk about it a lot. Even just asking people what they think I mean when I say the word utopian, right? And usually directly impacted and targeted and marginalized communities say, well, Ash, when you say utopian, I think impossible or ideal, right? It's that apple pie in the sky shit, but you ain't never really gonna get it, right? And it does mean ideal, right? But usually when I ask people to tell me what their utopian visions are, they're not particularly impossible or ideal. I'll give you an example, and then I'll tell on myself. So really quick, I was facilitating a people's movement assembly in Atlanta around protecting and defending communities to end state violence. This was like early 2000s-ish. And some of the folks that were in the People's Movement Assembly were these young people from Atlanta, Black people from Atlanta, young Black siblings of mine that were like high school age. And I asked them like, yo, like, okay, we talked about the problem. Cops are the problem. Police brutality is the problem. mass incarceration is the problem, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, what's your utopian vision? And they were like, okay. And they went over in their little corner for about 10 minutes. And then these young, like high school students come back to me and they're like, we got it, Ash. I was like, bet, hit me. They were like, in our utopian vision, when the cops come in our communities and they do foul shit, then we would get 15 minutes alone with them. And then after that 15 minutes, we would, you know, be the ones that actually train them on how to never create that kind of harm in our neighborhoods again. Gives me goosebumps even when I repeat it, because I'm like, oh man, that has to make you feel powerful. Like you would get self-determined justice with these cops who harmed you. Hell yeah, Ashley. I was like, bet. Can I ask you a follow-up question? They were like, yeah. I was like, in your utopian vision, there would still be cops in your neighborhood? And they were like, shit. And they went over in the corner for another 10 minutes and I didn't give them a lecture. I didn't do some like deep political education. I didn't make them read Angela Davis and Ruthie Gilmore, Miriam Kaba, and Andrea Ritchie, though they should do that. I gave them some space to assess if they could do an even closer to utopian vision. And they came back within 10 minutes and said, Ash, we got it. I said, hit me. They said, in our utopian vision, people would have what they need, so there would be no harm, so there would be no usefulness to a system like policing and incarceration in the first place. Like, boom. I say that to say people can get there, but we've got to create the spaces for folks to have radical imagination around utopian visions. So if you when you ask me, the first thing that pops in my mind is like defunded police, and we would have like the right to migrate wherever we wanted to, and no customs and border patrol, and this wouldn't exist, and that wouldn't exist, and this would stop, and this would stop. But that's not a vision. That's not a vision, right? So my vision is that we live in a world where the only reason y'all want to talk to me is because I'm a funny fucker. Because I can pour a good drink, because I can cook some good food, because you want to hang out with me. But that we wouldn't be doing this. The way that we would come into community is not through our trauma, is not through the harm of our people. I would know G because G is awesome. I would know Miski because Miski is awesome, and I should know them, right? Not just because we had to know each other to stop terrible things from happening to our people. So my utopian vision is that, like, yeah, there is no work, right? There is no work to be done, labor or movement wise, right? There is no work. People can just be, and we can figure out how to live and be in right relationship beyond transaction, because that's what I believe was meant for our people in the first place, that we would have everything we deserve without request. Right? That people could do or not do whatever the hell they wanted to do or not do, as long as it don't harm nobody, right? And I know we can do that because I see us practice that on a micro level every day, right? We make choices about what we need and what we need to share for the sake of everybody being good, right? And we fight back against our own inclinations, our own internalized oppression that says that I've got to hoard everything to myself to take care of me and mine at the expense of you and yours, right? We practice that every day. So I believe my utopian vision is that to scale. And when I think about the things that I don't hear, right, it's like I hear people asking a lot of questions about what our movements meant when we said defund all of us, you know, United We Dream, M4BL, all the local organizations like BBC and others that have been raising that demand for years, well before 2020, but that popularized in a different way, in a different scale in 2020. I hear a lot of people asking questions about that, but not creating spaces for people to reimagine what safety looks like beyond policing, right? So I hear a lot about the defund side, but I don't hear a lot about the invest side, right? That was actually the original demand, was to abolish, right? But the path to that would be investing in community solutions that build healthy, sustainable, and equitable communities with the funds that are defunded from police, right? It's not like we're just trying to like cut a random check that doesn't have any place to go. We actually know that if we got 1,000 miles ahead of harm in the first place, if we resource solutions to alleviate harm in the first place, adequate housing, great fully funded schools, mental health care in ways that aren't carceral and punitive, treatment facilities, right? Like de-escalators, all of the things that we actually wouldn't have to call mostly men with guns to come and not actually stop harm in the first place. Because that's actually what cops do, right? They respond to a harm that's already happening, right? So I think the thing that I want to hear more is like, what would you do with the millions of dollars that are invested in policing if you controlled your city budget? or your county budget or your state budget or the federal budget, right? What would you do if you had access to the billions with a B dollars that are spent just for Israeli military aid alone, right? How many more hospitals would you have? How many more counselors in your school? How many more, free housing for all I care for our people? How much more access to insurance, right? Or what insurance wouldn't even exist. You'd just be able to go to the doctor, right? Like what would you do if you actually could determine what you did with the money that you give to the state that's supposed to be used to take care of you and yours? I think that's what I want to hear more of. It's like, we can debate all day the semantics of defund, whether it's radical or not, or da-da-da-da-da. We can do that all day long. But I'm actually not trying to have that argument because we're already winning defund. I'm trying to have an argument, an intellectually stimulating debate about how we invest the dollars that we're moving. And if that's actually creating the solutions that we sought, or if the state is like, okay, fine, we're going to give you some crumbs, but it actually is just, platinum Band-Aids on a gaping wound, and they're calling that the solution that we asked for versus what we asked for. So the period on the sentence to me is like, we're already seeing it happen on the federal level, right? We're seeing our movement create an uprising moment that changed the trajectory of the United States as we know it. And we're seeing Congress respond with the Justice and Policing Act when we wrote the Breathe Act. And don't get me wrong, Black people in elected office that are pushing that, or Black people in big nonprofits that are pushing that, are not my enemy, right? But it is clear to me that when we said defund the police, which centered our community needs, that they responded by saying justice and policing, one, which is oxymoronic. There's no such thing as justice and policing. It's like rooted in white supremacy. There's no way to fix that. But even more, it centers moving more money to the police that we just said to defund. There's no way to fix that. You can't, that's lipstick on a pig, no pun intended. So I think, just to be real, to me, what I want to hear is people not bend, not concede to a neoliberal agenda that actually doesn't give us what we said we wanted.
Period. Period. This is why, I got a little lost in my earlier response, but this is what a Black woman-led centered movement is about. What Ash just laid out, I think that when I ask myself, like, my answer has evolved over the years in my organizing. When someone asks me like what's like my vision of liberation, and at UWD we have these exercises where we're like, close your eyes, like, what do you see, and like at the beginning it was just me with like living in a nice house and like having a porch around and like just like being okay and having money in the bank, and that is still real for me, and it's still but I think that like the vision as the years have gone by has expanded to many more people. And to what Ash was saying, it's like I just want the freedom to move. Like, everybody is inherently like has inherent dignity and value, and everyone is able to live in a safe and healthy conditions. Like, it feels like super, like when I first started off in our organizing, like there was a moment where I got like all complex and I read all of those people that Ash was just talking about, and it's important, and it's been like central to my development. And I always feel like I always come back to like, I want my mom to have had a chance to go to the doctor where she felt unwell. I want my dad to like have felt like what it was like to have like his labor actually be paid in a fair way. I would want my sister, who is a teacher, to not feel like forced by the governor of Texas to like put her life at risk in this moment of a pandemic. Like, I just want like the simple things that like feel so easy for some, but so out of reach and impossible for those, for Black people and brown people and immigrants and queer folks. So I just, part of I want people to have like the freedom to thrive and be exactly their own ass messy selves that they are, but like to be able to like choose to be that and like be able to thrive in that. I want people to have the freedom to stay in a place where they can belong, in a place where they can call home, where they have like psychological security and are able to have water and air and land and food and education. Like those are all the things that I see, and why, you know, sometimes when we do these visioning exercises, or we talk about our vision, it feels really far off. But I think the thing that's missing in the conversation is how like things is already happening. You know, like some of these stuff, like people, in particular Black women and women in our societies and in our spaces, are already making it happen. Like when you talk about you know, investment in education and for the children to be able to have what they need, like that's the sacrifice that I'm sure like the women that poured into the four of us did, and like that's the work that they did for us to be able to have it. Like it already happened. Like when we talk about like ensuring that there's like access to healthcare, like I think about all of the people that are right now hustling with their moms or their dads or their grandmas on how to get them like the vaccine. And like, it's like some of them have been successful and it's already happening. So I think that there is sometimes like we don't give ourselves credit for the work and the miracles that we in our organizing have already made happen. Like when we talk about the reapportionment of budgets into education rather than police, like the movement for Black lives and the ecosystem have like shit tons of examples where that has already happened in a matter of months, you know? And so sometimes I think that it works to our opposition's advantage to have us thinking like what we feel, like what we're wanting for is like so far away and like will never happen. And but every single day, this stuff is happening and has already happened. And so that's my reminder to myself that like, that young people, that queer people, that undocumented folks, that Black folks, like that we've already like cemented so many victories, like having a place where, you know, we were talking about earlier, Misky and Ash, like you all put millions of dollars on the field in the hands of organizers for them to decide how they want to do that. Like it's not some far away place, it's happening right now. And so I feel like that radical imagination, the discipline of hope, of joy and transformation, all of those come into one place to be able to create the conditions for us to win. And so when I say like we already won, one is like I learned it from Ash, but two is like I really do feel it. Like I just feel like we have created, like even if it's a small microcosm within United We Dream, queer, young, undocumented people can like in moments feel in our spaces that they truly belong, and like there is no other place where they should be, and like that they have roots that go down all the way to the other side. And so we have created that. And when I think about like the big opposition, like racial capitalism and the way that like that shows, and patriarchy, and how we saw that sort of played out in places like Georgia, you know, sometimes it makes me think, oh man, we're so far away, and there is work to come. And I go back to when I first started this work, there was a part of my education as an organizer was to go to the South and to speak to like our elders there that like led work for generations. And what they told me, and at that moment, I just was like, whatever, like that's not for me. They're like, they told me, the work that you will do will be necessary, but not sufficient. And at that moment, it kind of crushed my little organizer heart about like, what are you talking about? You know? But now in the world that I'm in, you know, the work that we're doing is necessary. It is magical. It is miracles. It is like transformational, and it will not be sufficient because that's the work to do. There will be people behind us, and our job right now is like, even as we rack up these policy wins, as we like get all of these members of Congress elected that are more accountable to our people, the legacy that I think the four of us and like the many people that are going to be engaging with this will be the people and that we leave behind, organized, ready with this shared collective vision of how to move forward. That is our legacy, and that's the work that we're wanting to do, which is why a multiracial, Black centered like work is an important step towards getting us there, because it gets us that much closer to seeing our vision and our lives in a much broader scale.
I wish we could do this all day. This has been fantastic. I really wanted to draw out this idea that what we want is possible, and that there is power in knowing that what is possible is happening. And I think that is actually what is can be overwhelming, can be exciting, and is a threat, right? Because there's power in knowing that we're already winning. And we all just work from as humans, we just work from a different position when we know that something is already happening and that we're contributing to something that's already happening and is successful. So,
yeah, I mean, I think it's not hard in a vacuum, right? It's hard in a context that we've inherited that was like, actually, like, most folks don't actually give a shit about what you want. And so you get socialized to preempt disappointment, right? To play small. And I think, the moral of the story is we got a big inheritance and a big powerful movement to live up and into, to be able to do it. I think that, like, the fear of failure is like another reason why people don't vision, or they think it's a luxury, right? That, like, they're bombing kids and they're doing this and they're doing that. Like, it's some American essentialism to talk about dreaming, right? Just to be real, I've heard it. I've been there. I might have said some of it sometimes, right? But what's real is, like, how do you get to where you're going if you don't know where you're driving to? It's just the moral of the story. We actually, like, mediocre white men make lots of money to fail all the time. All the time. So we can't let fear, which is a tool of white supremacy and capitalism, keep us from visioning where we ought to be. And so the question isn't just what is your vision, what is your utopian vision? It's like, is that it? That's it? If Greisa told me that what she wants is freedom to move around wherever she wanted, whenever she wanted, my question to her would be like, is that all? Because I love her. So I believe in so much more, that and everything else, right? If Misty asked me, or told me what their vision was and was like, yeah, man, I want a Midwest where cops don't kill Black people, I'd be like, yeah, right, exactly. And because we don't live single issue lives, so we deserve multi-issue visions. And I think we are so conditioned to ask for what is comfortable that we're not totally devastated if we don't totally win it, right? Or we don't even know the difference between what we want and need and deserve, because we don't get taught that. I certainly didn't. I didn't know that what I wanted and what I deserved was the same thing until I was super grown. Like going through a breakup on a plane, watching a movie about a little gay white kid that got outed called Love, Simon. I swear to God, that's how I figured it out. 2018 for the win, right? Like a couple of years ago, I'm telling you, being vulnerable, right? It's like, that's when I figured it out. I was like, oh, that's what it is. That's what white mamas teach white boys all the time, is like, you deserve whatever you want. I was like, oh shit, that's what it is. Then I want everything for Black people. I want everything for poor people. I want everything for immigrants. I want everything. Like, I want it all. I want it all. And I know we can get it because I see it. I see it. It's right there, right? So, I think to Graisa's point about, like, sometimes it feels so out of the way or far away, or what Solana, you said about, like, how just overwhelming it can be. It's like, okay, cool. That could be the vision, but what you working towards right now could be like what's a little bit that gets you a little closer to the horizon, right? Norman Wong talks about this all the time, right? About the long arc, right? And what the horizon is. And the horizon is the things that you can see, but are just out of reach, like abolition. Right? It's right there. I can see it. I see it happening to some other people even. But like, I can't touch it yet. But I bet if I divested resources from policing and invested it in my community, I bet I'd be closer to the horizon. That's the work. You don't stop at utopian vision in the People's Movement Assembly. You move to what is the faithful, disciplined, and rigorous next step I can take that gets me a little bit closer to it. And that step might be like a big old giant leap to abolition. I'm here for it. Take the whole thing down, right? But it also might be like a policy step or a political education step, and all that's okay. So my question isn't just what's your utopian vision. Mine's like, is that actually what you want? If you could have everything you wanted, is that what you'd ask for? Just that? That's the word. And I think that's why people follow G, man. It's because G makes that shit so tangible, you know? It helps us see that we deserve it. We deserve like the struggle and the sustaining of those things, and we deserve the joy that comes from actually experiencing it. Like freedom and liberation are a practice.
Thank you for listening. For more conversations like this one, visit forageorganizing.org. We'll see you on Twitter at Forage Organizing. For more information on Black Visions, visit blackvisionsmn.org or follow them on Twitter at blackvisionsmn. You can find more information on Liberation in a Generation at liberationinageneration.org or follow them on Twitter at liberationin. Thank you to Nino Fernandez for post-production audio and editing. And thanks to all of you for listening. Take care and stay safe, everyone.